Hello everyone and welcome to week 7 of Exercise Physiology for Sport with Concordia University, fall semester 2018. Once again, I'm Professor Mark Baines. We are over the halfway point. We've completed our one and only paper, one exam. We have 2 exams left remaining. Otherwise, we have our typical discussion board posts each week and our 2 Learn Smarts every week. We have our next paper, number 2, comp in a week, so essentially 2 weeks it'll be due. That said, we'll get right to it, talking about the effects of training on VO2max or aerobic capacity, performance and strength, all the above, along with cardiorespiratory fitness testing. Okay, talking first about some concepts from week 6, talking about acid-base balance and temperature variations. First and foremost, warming up in extreme temperatures. When it's extremely hot, the warm-up should be short. 5-10 minutes tops, very, very brief. You don't want to overly fatigue people, right? That's very short. Intensity, of course, they're probably already a little warm, so their intensity is already a little bit higher than it normally would be because of the heat. So they won't need as much warm-up, and you don't want to fatigue them. That said, you know, heart rate-wise, people often start activity somewhere around 20-30% of their max, give or take, all depending. And of course, gradually want to get them ready for the activity we're about to engage. If the intensity is supposed to be high today, then we want to make sure they get just about that point at the end of their warm-up. RPE, rate of perceived exertion, we don't want that to be high in general. We never want that to be high. Generally speaking, the person's running like you can't believe or lifting incredible weights, and the RPE is not high. That said, we do want to set an RPE ceiling. I don't want you to feel like it's any harder than an 8. I don't want you to feel like it's any harder than a 6. Whatever it might make sense by the end of the warm-up period in this particular case. Typically looking between 6 and 8 is pretty normal. A 10 by the end of your warm-up, it might be a little bit stressful, maybe not really conducive to a proper training session that follows that warm-up. VO2 max, now you're looking at trying to get them at least geared up toward that about 60% VO2 max, probably in most cases, definitely at least 50%, because you're not getting any real training effect benefit at all from if you're not even at 50% of VO2 max, if the goal is anything other than recovery. We're talking about recovery, we're really not probably warming up. We're doing something that's very, very light. So we're talking about an actual training session of a moderate, or at least light moderate, training level intensity going toward higher intensity, all depending on the goal today. Percent max force output, well, what's the goal for the day? It's got to start very, very light. They've been doing nothing. Starting right into a high intensity makes no sense. We've got to gradually build into it, whatever we're doing, right? Little common things, but we really have to think about all those variables. The heart rate, the RPE, the VO2 max, if we're doing anything that's cardiovascular related in any way, shape, or form. And of course, max force output, that's included no matter what we're doing, okay, as a general idea. Cooling down. Oh, and I should have said, my apologies. Warming up in cold temperatures. We've got to warm up for longer, right? That's our biggest difference. You have to warm up much longer to make sure they get fully warmed for their activity. It's going to have to be a lot more gradual in the increasing of intensity, the gradual increase in the heart rate. We don't want to see big jumps. And in colder temperatures, that's even hot temperatures, it's not uncommon to see big leaps in intensity challenge, whether you're talking about RPE, VO2 max, max heart rate, or force output. Make sure it's much more gradual in cold. Cooling down, the duration for the heat, again, not going to probably be as long as a typical cool down because we don't want a person to get overly tired and fatigued, but at least 10 minutes. Sometimes they'll say as much as 15, 20. Potentially could be longer, absolutely, but generally speaking, that's a good general number. Cold, maybe a little bit longer than that, okay? Intensity-wise, we're trying to get them back down to that 20-30% intensity they had when they first started the activity. I want them to feel like, hey, we worked out, we worked hard, but you know what? That cool down made me feel so good, I almost feel like I could go back and do some more. If they don't feel like that, there's something wrong in your cool down programming. You're supposed to feel good by the end of the cool down, not feel all bloated with all the venous pooling, the blood having rushed to those tissues, right? And you're going to see that a lot more with extremes in temperature, with difficulties in circulation, especially cold, and in heat, they're just going to be overly fatigued, right? And that said, RPE, of course, has got to come down substantially, so they feel it's like a 3 or a 4. Maybe 3 is a little light, but around 4, definitely not more than 4 or 5. By the time they finish their cool down, it should be light. No breathing hard. Ventilatory control should be well within their capabilities. They should be able to talk to one another, that kind of thing in the cool down. It shouldn't be intense. Okay, I'm not talking about conditioning, we're cooling down. The VO2 max, of course, is going to again drop below that 50% VO2 max for sure in that cooling down period. Max force output, probably below 40% max force output by the time we're finishing that cool down period. And again, on the low side, probably 10 minutes, possibly as much as 20 minutes or more in that regard. Okay, and that said, static stretching versus dynamic exercises. We've talked a lot about this here and there, but I want to make something really, really clear. Static stretching, if the goal is to get flexible, to loosen you up, in the immediate moment, right now. Static stretching is phenomenal. If the goal is to get you ready for activity right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to do static stretching, but it is not wrong. We don't got to stop the way some people tend to talk about something being right or wrong. Depends on the goal. What are you trying to accomplish? That's always the question. Whenever someone says to me, what do you think about static stretching? What do you think about dynamic exercise? What do you think about anything? My first question is, what's your goal right now? What do you want to accomplish? Not long-term necessarily, well, maybe, but certainly in this moment, the next 5, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, then we talk about the most appropriate thing. But there's never an end-all, be-all. And I wouldn't really call the static stretching as part of the warming up or the cooling down. It's its own specific focal point of increasing flexibility, in which case I have frequently added it with my athletes the first thing they do. Yep, the first thing they do. To loosen them up, then we engage in dynamic exercise. This is when time is permitting. If we don't have enough time, we don't do that. Okay, but that is the perfect world. You loosen them up completely, then add in the dynamic activity and get them going from there. Perfect world, that would be ideal. That said, probably not the most conducive for a power type workout. Not so much, okay? But certainly static stretching at the end to loosen them up after your cool down, after the cool down is done, okay? Dynamic is a portion of everything, part of everything we do, as it were, anyway. That said, water intake. A lot of people talk about the need for water, but you weren't clear about what that really means. Your textbook refers to about every 20 minutes drinking 150 to 300 milliliters of water. The research I've seen the most from is about 6 to 8 ounces every 10 to 15 minutes of activity. And when that activity is engaged, meaning the person's active, not sitting a lot, moving a little bit, sitting a lot, moving. We're talking about people who are going the whole time. When they're an hour plus of activity or more, every 15 minutes, they're looking at maybe at 15, 20 minutes at the very, very most, drinking 6 to 8 ounces of a carbohydrate beverage that's basically 6 to 8% carb solution, like a Gatorade. Yeah, Gatorade nailed it. I love it when people criticize Gatorade. It's just ridiculous. Someone's engaging in endurance activity, they don't care whether they get Gatorade or some other carbohydrate drink for the most part. You can get into the elite levels, oh, we're talking different. You take the most expensive, best possible stuff you can get. We're talking about the average person who can't have the perfect drink, the perfect protein shake, the perfect everything. Gatorade works just fine. Okay, something to consider definitely for active athletes who are going for hour plus activity. They're playing soccer and they're playing the whole game. It's Gatorade they should be drinking. They get in for a couple periods here and a couple short moments in time here and there. Drink water. They don't need Gatorade, okay? Same is true for a football player and anybody else, okay? Let alone someone who's engaging in regular activity like an endurance athlete. Well, then we're talking about long runs. Absolutely, that carb drink, okay? Best reduction for acidosis, rest, okay? And then, of course, on top of that rest, you could actually add in active rest. Rest completely when it's possible or capable of doing so, when we're engaging in high intensity, 95 to 100% intensity, super light intensity, light walking, light moving, right? If it's a little bit more toward moderate level intensity, we'd be a little more active and engaging between sets and moving more. But we don't want to be completely not moving anything. That's called sleep. Okay? Otherwise, we want to move something, keep ourselves active. We're going to do it again. We don't want to be doing nothing. You're not going to recover well. Blood's going to be pooled in the area, and we're not going to get a proper response the next time we get in the next set. So the best reduction for acidosis is the proper rest, light movement between sets. Nothing gets strenuous at all, so they're ready again to go again after that. Anybody who talked about water in your post last week, you were totally right. You talked about like the whole process of proper intensity. That's absolutely true. People taking some supplements can help that as well. The most important part is the proper application of rest. Okay, and we're talking about percent max heart rate. You're going to see as they get that heart rate up above that 85, 90%, you can see a dramatic need for reduction of acidosis, right? The really high intensity type work. That includes max heart rate, certainly. That's also going to be VO2 max is going to be well above that 85%, 75% at that same time frame. Fairly high intense work. VO2 max, the more we challenge that VO2 max, certainly the more acidosis we're going to have as well. Depends on the duration of activity. You're going to see it significantly start to increase about 45 seconds in to significant activity. If you're talking about someone who's sprinting, they're going for 10 seconds, 15 seconds with breaks between, you're not going to see a dramatic amount of acidosis. Of course, if you do set after set after set with fairly short rest periods, yeah, you're going to see more and more of that, okay? That said, on to week 7. This week with chapter 13 and 15. Overload, the concept of overload. I like to say it's overload, not overkill. Okay? We're not trying to beat someone up. We're trying to figure out where are you now, what minimal stress, such an interesting concept. What minimal stress can we give you to get a positive response? Actually, a definition given by Stuart McGill when talking about back disorders and back issues and spinal problems was one of the best things I ever heard someone say. He would say, he didn't come up with it, it's true physiology, but the ideal stress for someone is the least amount of stress to achieve a positive result. That's such a simple concept, right? Just give them just a little bit more than they normally do. That's all we have to do. That's overload, not overkill, okay? Any way of doing that. The frequency you do something, the load you give somebody, the speed in which you do it, the rest period shortening, anything like that's going to increase overload to some capacity, okay? Reversibility or detraining. When you start going away from activity, within 2 or 3 weeks, you can lose up to about 5–10% plus of your muscle hypertrophy, means muscle growth, you can lose some of that, or your VO2 max aerobic type capacity, your cardiorespiratory type function can go down 5 or 10% as little as 2 weeks. Maybe more than that, I mean, a lot more than that. Start getting into weeks 3 up to about month 3. Now we can see as much as a 20–30% plus drop in response and capability performance-wise. Now, reversibility will remind you, you can gain back that hypertrophy. What's very, very impressive is, and very interesting, I should say, you can gain back your hypertrophy that you may have had easier than you can gain back your cardiorespiratory function. It's interesting. You might think of the other way around. I always thought it was. No, it's a lot harder to get back after 3+ months off, 6 months plus off your cardiorespiratory function than it is to get your hypertrophy back. Hypertrophy comes back much quicker. Within a few, like couple, 2–3 months, you can gain back everything you lost after the last 6 months of not doing it. Pretty impressive, right? Doesn't mean you will, just means you can. And of course, detraining, you're going to, from cardiovascular wise, it's going to take you probably double that to gain back what you lost if you took 6 months off. Not always true. There's always individuality, the law of individuality with different individuals and how they respond to stress, but something to think about. Bottom line is, don't take more than 2 or 3 weeks off from exercise. You don't have to worry about trying to come back from everything. Some things can't be helped, right? Specificity. We're talking about, when you talk about specificity, talking about the specific exercise to meet a goal. What muscles are involved? What muscle fiber type? Is it type 1, type 2A, type 2X, or all the above? What energy system we're utilizing right now? Well, it's going from ATP-CP to glycolysis to aerobic oxidation as we go longer and longer, right? So we got to be clear about what energy system we're using right now. What's the speed which you're doing it? People in the weight room, they always go too fast. Well, if you're talking about muscle action, concentric versus eccentric versus isometric, we got to be clear about that too. Got to think about all these things when you start engaging in exercise. If I'm talking about running, well, I want to be clear about what muscles we're working. We're working more type 1, type 2A, or type 2X. What energy system are we working on? We're sprinting, we're ATP-CP, we're doing more intervals, probably more glycolytic, we're doing more endurance type work. Okay, we're more toward aerobic, right? Speed-wise, going to be slowing down the longer we go. Muscle action, well, we have the same basic action, motion-wise, but different muscle fiber type, different energy system we're involving, and different speed, okay? All those variables must be considered. It's a lot, but you're doing far better than most coaches if you think about those things. VO2 max improvement. How do you improve VO2 max? Well, 3 sessions per week of about 20 to 60 minutes of at least 50% VO2 max, possibly as high as 70–75% VO2 max, can show dramatic improvement at VO2 max, as little as 5% in some individuals who are already well conditioned and don't have a big jump capabilities. Doing that for a period of a few weeks. Or like really basically talking about 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, okay? At least probably more like 8, 10, 12 weeks, maybe as much as 16. You can see a 5–10% increase for the well-conditioned person possibly. It could be as high as 50% in only a few months. Here's the thing. You start seeing dramatic changes after about 4 months, dramatic, okay? And you can see them up to 32 months from VO2 max improvement if you're doing the right blending of the recovery type workouts, the moderate intensity type workouts, the VO2 max challenge type workouts. You're going steady state, harder, and intervals. Be careful with the people who are high intensity interval training thumpers about that's the best way. No, it's one of the things you want to make sure you implement and add to what you do. It does not replace other things. There's a big difference. I love the word and. I do not like the word or. When people talk about separating things like that, I don't think they fully understand physiology. Okay? That said, for VO2 max testing, there's a given time frame we want to utilize it for testing VO2 max. But you got to go at least 20 minutes of activity up to about 60 minutes. Somewhere in that range is really the most ideal for time frame for improving of aerobic capacity. Go less than that, not going to see much change. Go more than that, well, I guess if you're an ultra endurance athlete, otherwise there's not a whole lot of need to be going that long of a duration. We actually could be looking at more prolonging intensity, whereby we're going to actually create possibly more stress than the body needs. Okay. That said, hypertrophy gains, muscle growth. You'll start to see significant muscle growth improvements around 8 weeks. Some texts say about 7, some say as little as 6. So if you're looking to increase strength, well, and you want to see the benefit of that strength, you're not going to see the benefit for probably at least 8 weeks, maybe as many as 12. So you don't want to be doing during your competitive phase of sport, doing a lot of hypertrophy, high intensity type strength training type work. That should have been happening in the phase before, at least 8 weeks or more before the competitive phase. Okay, you don't want to be overly fatiguing the person right now, and you're not even seeing the benefit from it. Whatever you do, it's about 8 weeks. That's also why we talk about in a real highly competitive sport, the 8 weeks prior to your big game or the big competition or your finals, however you want to think about it. You don't want to be going crazy with intensity. You're trying to hold on to what you've got. Hopefully you build a proper base over many, many months throughout this year, let alone years of preparation. Like we said, VO2max can improve for up to 32 months. Hypertrophy, no specific limits on knowing where that really is until we've actually worked with it for long periods of time. Okay, so that said, we think about it long term, not just what's happening next few weeks. Okay, and of course, and I should say too, going back with hypertrophy gains, you can lose muscle fiber, like we talked about, a little 2 to 3 weeks start to lose it. Hyperplasia is growing new fibers, unless maybe your name is, well, any one of the top level bodybuilders, but certainly maybe Usain Bolt, someone freakish, right? Serena Williams from tennis, incredibly powerful, right? Athletic, amazing. People who can actually have such outlandishly high capability beyond anybody else in their sport when it comes to the concept of strength. Okay, or the ability to produce force, we should say, because that's what hypertrophy is. All right, we're talking about possibly they may be freakish and that they actually have the capacity to grow new fibers, but that is not a normal thing for athletes to have at all. Okay, it's very unusual actually. That said, and hypertrophy, of course, we're talking about you got to engage in at least 2, maybe 3 hypertrophy type workouts per week. We'll talk more about this in later weeks coming up here. But you're talking about a work period, about 40 to 75 seconds. Talking about a rest period, about 60 to 90 seconds, and whatever intensity you can handle in that time period. I love when someone asks, what weight should I lift? What weight can you handle for 40 to 75 seconds? If you can easily make it 75 seconds, it's too light. If you can't make it 40 seconds, it's too heavy. It's really pretty simple. Okay, doesn't mean you can't get hypertrophy from anything, because you can. An endurance athletes have significant hypertrophy of their type 1 muscle fibers, whereas a bodybuilder is going to have a lot more type 2A hypertrophy and some type 2X. And like a strongman competitor, or even a sprinter and whatnot, is going to have a lot more hypertrophy toward their type 2X fibers. Okay, there's always hypertrophy there though. Last point, VO2max testing. For average person, want to have that test be between 10 and 20 minutes long. After the warm-up, do 10 to 20 minutes of cardiovascular testing. And for an athlete, 10 to 12 minutes, more accurate. Okay, for the athletes. Okay, interesting, right? Form-wise, well, what are you going to use? You can do a cycle. If you have a cyclist, use a cycle. Someone's overweight, well, now you don't use either the step test or the cycle. Older adults, you're afraid of the impact of running and whatnot. Great, cycle or the step test. The graded exercise tests, like there's a cardiovascular test for the step where they keep changing the step height, and they keep changing basically the number of steps and the speed in which you do it. Some pretty impressive stuff you can do more extensively for people who are ready for it. But that said, step tests very good for overweight or older individuals in many cases, or a cycling test. But you have a true runner, or someone who can run. If they can run, do a running test. Cooper test outdoors. Treadmills just don't cut it. You do it if you want to talk about doing a test where you actually get the gas exchange. Well, yeah, you're going to have to do a treadmill. But you really want to see how far can this person go? How far can they get in basically 12 minutes, like the Cooper test? Okay. And age-related differences. Kids are often stressed like adults, which is scary because we already do silly, ridiculous things to adults. It's based on whatever the person can handle. If they've been doing something and they have no particular issues, no particular injuries, no particular problems, they've continued to improve, we can challenge them more. But generally speaking, be very cautious with our younger adults, younger kids and younger adults, age 5 to 17, with overstressing them with too much work. Be careful, please. Older adults, same thing, not overstressing. But if you think about that 1% improvement, a little bit of stress more than you used to, can have phenomenal results. Okay. Final thoughts. Your paper that you completed just this last week will be your signature assignment for your portfolio. So please make sure you take a look at my comments about things you want to make sure you adjust for submitting it for your portfolio for your master's degree as a whole. And ask me if you have questions at all, let me know. I'd love to help you out any more. I don't want to just leave it as I give you some comments and there you go. If you have any questions, let me know with that. Otherwise, we have an exam in just over a week, so 2 weeks away. Otherwise, we have our normal just to learn smarts on our discussion board post on the topics we just talked about right here. Keep up the efforts. Keep working hard. I appreciate you. Really do. And we'll talk to you again soon.